Well, hi everybody, Father Alex here. Welcome to another episode of the Godcast. I'm the vicar of St Matthew's Church. If you'd like to know that, you might not be at all interested, but I'm the vicar of St Matthew's Church in Burnley. I'm also the author of Our Daily Bread from Argos to the Altar Pre-Story, which is available in all good bookshops, Waterstones and online, so do check that out. My guest this week on the Godcast is Mark Russ. Now, Mark is a Quaker. He's a theologian from the Quaker denomination of the church. And so it's going to be very interesting to listen to Mark to tell us and help us understand a little bit about his faith and his tradition and the denomination which he is a part of. So if you enjoy this Godcast, do check out others. There's loads out there, different subjects of religion. There are celebrities, musicians, authors, sports people, celebrities, you name it. There really is something for everybody. But for now, I do hope you enjoy this interview with Mark Russ. Well, I'm delighted to say that joining me on the Godcast this week is Mark Russ. Mark is a Quaker. He's a theologian. He's a writer. He's a blogger. Mark, it's really great to get you on. How are you?
I'm really great. Thanks, Alex. It's really nice to be invited.
I suppose the first question I've got, Mark, is when I introduce you as a Quaker, I suppose there'll be quite a lot of people go, well, what does that mean? What are you? What is it? Tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about it, if you would.
So Quakerism began as a Christian sect in the mid 17th century in England during the sort of crisis of the Civil War, the English Civil War. And then it moved to North America and then to the rest of the world. And so even though it started in England, the average Quaker today globally is a Black African evangelical Christian, which can sometimes be a surprise to English Quakers. Um, but the kind of Quakerism you get, so, and there's lots of different varieties of Quakerism now. Quakerism has only been around for sort of 350 years, and already there's lots of different kinds of Quakerism in the world. But the sort of Quakerism you get that I'm familiar with in Britain is recognizable by its silent worship. So if you were to go to a Quaker meeting, so we don't talk about church, we talk about going to meeting. If you went to a meeting for worship at a Quaker meeting house, you would sit in silence, probably for an hour with a group of people, probably in a circle or in a square. And during that hour of silence, you would see probably you'd have at least one or two people speak into that silence during that hour. So when people feel moved to speak in that silence, they're free to sort of give what we call vocal ministry. So they're able to speak into that silence. So the idea is that together in that silence, we listen to the spirit of love and truth. And that spirit may have something for the whole gathered meeting to hear and learn from. And so that spirit can speak through anyone. And so we don't have particular people who have that role of speaking the words of the spirit to the rest of the group. Anybody might be given those words to speak. So there's no priest. There's no. I mean, there are kinds of hierarchies like you get in any group of people, but sort of officially, there's no sort of institutional hierarchy. We also don't have sacraments in the way you might experience in say in the Church of England, like the bread and wine of the Eucharist. We have this idea of the whole of life being sacramental, and so the spirit can work through bread and wine, but the spirit can also work through lots of other means, and particularly it can work internally, sort of spiritually within the individual and with sort of within the worship of the group. So those are sort of things you would might notice as being quite different to, say, a Church of England service.
Yeah. And is this something that you've grown up with? Is this were your family Quakers, or is this something that you kind of found for yourself? Just tell us a bit about your your journey with being a Quaker, Mark?
Yeah, so I grew up in a non-religious family. My dad has been an atheist for a very long time. He was forced to go to church as a child, um, and even got confirmed in the Church of England, but then rejected it all. And so we grew up in a non-religious house. My dad even gave away the family Bible that we'd inherited. He gave that away to a relative who was a Church of England minister. I sort of absorbed the general cultural Christianity that was about sort of singing hymns in assembly at school and Christmas carols and things like that. But certainly at the age of 15, 16, I was also very much an atheist and saw religion as being really hypocritical and based on fear. But then when I was 17, I came out as gay, or started the process of coming out as gay. And I that experience of coming out about my sexuality was also accompanied by a kind of coming out spiritually. Like, it was accompanied finally by accepting my whole self. It was like I was able to accept the spiritual part of myself, and I was having religious experiences, or experiences that I sort of could only really explain by using religious language. And the Quakers were the only group I knew of at the time who would welcome me as a gay man. I also didn't need to believe anything in order to go along to Quaker meeting, because Quakers in Britain are very there's a lot of freedom in terms of theology, in terms of how you interpret what's going on in a Quaker meeting for worship. So it was the Quakers offered me a really good space to explore. I did A-level history, and one of the things we focused on was the English Civil War. And I still remember the teacher talking about how difficult the Quakers were to debate with, because they didn't believe the Bible was the last word. And one of my closest friends at school was a fundamentalist Christian, the sort of Christian for whom even Catholics are going to hell. And I sort of just assumed that if I was going to be a Christian, I'd have to be like him. And so hearing this message that the Bible wasn't the last word, and I associated the Bible with like all of those passages about gay people being stoned to death and that kind of thing. So it was just there was something really liberating about being able to go into a space, explore my spirituality, and not have to commit to any particular kind of belief, and be amongst people who I knew me being gay just wasn't an issue.
Mark, you talk about coming out as gay, you talk about the spiritual. What about the psychological? Can I ask you about that? You know, coming out as gay, discovering a new form of spirituality in being a Quaker. Was there any guilt going on at that time? You know, about almost kicking the institution into touch, or leaving something that you thought maybe for a long time was the way and the truth. Just say a bit about that, if you would.
I'm honestly I'm very, very lucky. There's a lot of LGBT people who have a lot of trauma from how they've been treated and from institutions they've grown up in. I'm really glad I didn't grow up in the church. And my mum and dad have only ever wanted me to be happy. They don't really understand. Well, I think they find it easier to understand me being gay than they find accepting that I'm religious. But they have only ever wanted me to be happy. So as long as I'm happy, it's fine. And so they really instilled in me like a deep love of self. And so when I was coming out, I never had a sense of that being wrong. I knew that other people thought it was wrong, and that would make my life difficult. But I've never had to deal with that kind of sense of it being wrong. So yeah, guilt has never come into it for me.
Well, I'm very pleased to hear it. That's refreshing to hear. Actually, not the norm, is it? It really
No,
isn't.
no.
And in terms of Burnley and Mark, if I cross the road from where I am within about 50 yards, I've got the most beautiful view of Pendle Hill. Now,
Yeah.
if people aren't familiar with Pendle Hill, it's a beautiful hill.
Mhm.
People describe it as the grandest old hill in the world if you're
Yeah.
from Burnley, but it's got a long association with the Quaker movement, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Just could you tell us a little bit about that for people who might be interested to know?
Sure, sure. So, well, I was at Lancaster University this weekend gone, at a conference called the Fox at 400 conference. So George Fox, he's often called the founder of Quakerism. That's not quite true. He was born in Leicestershire, and he definitely was a big part of the early Quaker movement, but he also lived longer than a lot of the other leaders. So, and he got to write the book about it, sort of. So he's become known as the founder of Quakerism, and this year is 400 years since he was born. So it's his 400th anniversary. So there's lots of events going on in Quaker meetings around the country to sort of both celebrate that, but also use it as an opportunity to engage with Fox. So George Fox, he was a very troubled young man. He wasn't finding the answers to the questions he was asking in the preachers of the day, the sort of Puritans he was talking to. He wasn't finding the answers, and so he went into this spiritual crisis. And then he had an experience of it was he heard a voice saying that has come to teach his people himself, and so he he had this received sort of this message of God's immediacy with people, that people didn't need an institutional church in order to access God, in order to be led by God. And so he sort of went off traveling um, with this message, and he encountered lots of groups who have been called seekers. So people who were also disillusioned with the other forms of Christianity that were on offer, and had started meeting in silence, waiting for the way to be revealed. And Pendle Hill, I think, is where George Fox, he talks about this in his journal. So he wrote he wrote a journal describing his life. And one of the very famous parts of his journal is when he climbs Pendle Hill, and he talks about having a vision of a great people waiting to be gathered, and that is seen as the sort of the birth of the Quaker Church. And it happened in 1652, and so in the northwest of England, where there's lots of sites connected with the birth of Quakerism, such as Pendle Hill, such as Swarthmore Hall near Ulverston, Brigg Flats Meeting. That area is known as 1652 country. And there's tours you can go on and see these various sites. So Pendle Hill is a very as well as having its stories of witchcraft associated with it, it's also got the stories of the birth of Quakerism associated with it. Very important site in Quaker history.
Yeah, and I understand each Easter morning there's a pilgrimage, lots of Quakers
Mhm.
and go up the hill. It's a lovely place to visit if anybody's in Lancashire. And Mark, if we could just get down into a bit of the theology then of being a Quaker. So,
Sure.
um, you know, for example, is the Quaker movement, is it Trinitarian?
Mhm.
Just tell us a
Oh,
bit about that and how that reveals itself in within. I nearly said the church, but
yeah.
we don't use that term. Okay.
So so talking about Quaker theology is there's a lot of things that make it quite tricky, because Quakers have there's long been a kind of taboo around talking about Quaker theology right from the very beginning. And because people like George Fox, so one of the things George Fox is famous for saying, he said um, that you don't have to be bred at Oxford or Cambridge to be a minister of God. So he was very, there was almost a kind of anti-intellectualism, or a sense that it wasn't your academic training that made you a suitable minister of Christ. And theology was also seen as something very divisive. It was thought of as the things that Christians argue over when they should be in unity. So talking about the Trinity, Quakers rejected the label of they didn't talk about the Trinity because they saw that well, firstly, the Trinity is not a word that is found in the Bible, and they were that was one of their sort of reasons why they rejected talk of it. At the same time, when you read their writings, and even though they were sort of anti theology, they wrote a lot of theology. They were publishing lots of pamphlets and tracts, and so they were doing theology all the time in a kind of reacting to their critics. So they were sort of producing the theology to sort of make their case to their many critics. When you look at their theology, they were pretty much Trinitarian. Like they shared a lot of theology in common with the wider Puritan culture around them. So Quakers, I would say, in historically and globally, Quakers have been generally have held quite mainstream Christian beliefs, particularly Protestant Christian beliefs. And that's still the case globally today. Quakers in Britain have, at the beginning of the 20th century, there was a big shift in Quaker theology. In the 19th century, Quakers were really influenced by like Methodism, the evangelical revival movements, and so got really into evangelical Christianity. At the end of the 20th century, end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, Quakers became really influenced by liberal Anglican theology. And that started a shift. Well, one of the major decisions they made was that the Bible wasn't necessary for God's revelation. Experience, they decided that the experience of God, your experience in meeting for worship, was sufficient. And that set Quakers on a trend where I think from the 1960s, in the 1960s, it was decided that you didn't necessarily need to be a Christian in order to be a Quaker. This maybe intensifies in the 1980s, and Quakers start to become more and more what Quakers call universalist, what maybe theologians might call pluralist, so believing that there's no one religion that has a monopoly on the truth. And then in recent decades, Quakers have also started to differ on whether God has a role in Quakerism. So there are Quakers who describe themselves as non-theist, and so God language isn't very meaningful to them. So Quaker theology in Britain today is very diverse. I would describe it as post-Christian pluralism. I think that brings with it lots of challenges, but that's the kind of landscape that we're currently in.
So where do you fit in all that, Mark? I mean, you probably knew that was coming because you hear lots of references to they. This is what they. Where do you fit into that equation?
Yeah, you caught me out. So I said earlier that Quakers gave me the space to explore my beliefs. They didn't require me to believe anything. And I've been a member of the Quakers, also known as the Religious Society of Friends. I've been a member of the society for 20 years now. And during maybe that first decade, I discovered Christianity. I had to read a lot of books about it first. The John Shelby Spong, Marcus Borg, those were sort of the names of the people I was reading at the time that opened a door for me. I met my husband, who was a Christian, is a Christian. And I started going to the Greenbelt Festival. I did a course called Workshop, run by a guy called Noel Mools, which was a sort of 2-year course in applied Christian studies, but it was originally set up to provide sort of theological education to the house church movement. But I did that course, and that was my first that was what first got me excited about theology. And we did one of the weekends we did was on eschatology. So that's theology of the end times, of what happens at the end after we die, etc. And it just got me so excited. And it was actually that weekend that sort of initiated me becoming a Christian. Suddenly, Christianity made intellectual sense to me, and it had made emotional sense to me before that, but that's the point I got to where it made intellectual sense. And so, yeah, so then I was really getting into Christianity and Christian theology. What I found is that being a Christian in Quakers in Britain can be difficult for quite a few reasons. One is that because we don't really talk about theology, this taboo about theology still continues. And because we value silence so much, we just don't really, there's not a lot of opportunities to talk about your beliefs. And so we're sort of out of practice at doing it. And that also means that I think I've reached a point where sometimes I feel like people don't understand the language that I'm speaking. We don't really, I wonder what our shared language is with so much difference in our theology. What is our shared language, especially when Quakers say things like, we should get rid of the word worship because that's alienating. And I think, oh, if we're not worshiping, I don't think I want to do it. Or if God is optional, I don't know how that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I don't know what we're doing together. And
well, in some ways, Mark, it's quite comforting to know that we're not the only church who's got these kind of debates and discussions. But so we've established that you identify as a Christian. Is that fair?
yeah.
So if I could just push you, and I understand this is your view and it's not everybody's, and we're all entitled to a view. So if I said to you the Bible is what, how would you respond to something like that?
So I see the Bible as a sort of shared resource for us to argue over. So my favorite description of Christianity is by a theologian called Catherine Tanner, who said that the only thing that has united Christians for the last 2,000 years is arguing about what it means to be a Christian. And in a way, it maybe is deceptive to talk about Christianity in the singular. When you look at the history of Christianity, it's probably more truthful to talk about Christianities. And so I think you're a Christian if you are involved in the argument, if you have sort of skin in the game, if it's an argument you're invested in. And so the Bible is part of the landscape. It's part of, I don't know, I like to think of a box of Lego bricks. Like the Bible is part of our box of Lego bricks, and it's a resource for us. It's material for us to build something out of that works today. It's something for us to wrestle with and argue over. I don't see the Bible as, I have quite a low theology of the Bible. So for instance, when Christians who are affirming of LGBT people find ways to sort of reinterpret those passages in the Bible that other people use as part of an anti-gay agenda. I mean, I'm happy that they're doing that work, but for me, I don't need to be, that's not an important thing for me. I don't look to the Bible to tell me about sexual ethics. Like my experience of being a gay person is all I need for me to know that it's good. And I guess that's, even though I maybe don't fit so much with Quakers today, that real emphasis on my own experience definitely is part of my Quakerness.
I think it's a really interesting point that you've raised. I'm a liberal Catholic, and I think what you've said there about Christians finding ways to, I'm on the General Synod, which is the governing body of the Church of England. I'm an inclusive church member. I run an inclusive church. You're right, Mark. I do look to the Bible to find ways to kind of counteract the biblical argument from the conservative right. Maybe I need to stop doing that. I think you've just opened a little key there for me a door to explore. So if your theology of the Bible is quite low, I suppose it's only natural that I ask you about what is your interpretation and feeling, spiritual relationship with Jesus about and like.
Mhm. So even yeah, I have quite a low theology of the Bible, but I have a very high Christology. Like so for me, I really love what's his name? Um G.K. Chesterton.
Yeah,
Yeah, where he talked about Jesus being the key that unlocks, that fits the complicated lock. Yeah, Jesus is the key that sort of unlocks everything. And I really love that metaphor of Jesus as the key, because for me, um, Jesus, yeah, just he makes sense. And um, I don't separate the historical Jesus and the risen Christ. They very much belong together for me. I think Christ is, in one of my books, I talk about Jesus being my place to stand and my guiding star, because um, I feel like I really like that bit in the Gospels where the disciples are looking for Jesus, and is it an angel who says he's already gone ahead of you? That sense of Jesus being already ahead of me, like there's always more to discover. Jesus is someone I'll never have a full grasp of. Um, so yeah, that sort of combining that sense of having my feet firmly planted on the ground, but that the horizon is always expanding.
yeah. Gosh, Mark, this podcast has flown by, and I do want to allow a few minutes to just talk about the books that you've written. But I do have one last kind of theological question, and that is, you touched on eschatology. What is the end game? Are you a heaven and hell believer? Do you what? Just tell us about your theology in that regard, please, if you would.
Sure. Well, I'm very hopeful, but I'm also very pessimistic. So I think things are going to get bad in terms of the climate crisis, and politically, the future doesn't look great. But um, I do believe that God, I do believe that the end of the story will be good. What I don't know what the end of the story has not, the end of Christ's story has not been written. But God is the author, and so the end will be good. Um, I think before this, before Easter Sunday comes Easter Saturday and Good Friday. So I don't think even there's definitely hard times ahead, but I do feel that yeah, the ending will be good, whatever that looks like.
I see a lot of similarities between your thinking and mine, and I'm thinking maybe I should jump ship and join join. And I'm sure there's some Church of England members out there thinking I wish you would. But Mark, just to finish, just tell us about the books that you've some of the books that you've been working on or you've written, and
Sure.
and feel free to signpost them and plug your wares.
Oh, with pleasure. So my first book, so my first book is called Quaker-shaped Christianity: How the Jesus Story and the Quaker Way Fit Together. And that came out in 2022, published by Christian Alternative. And it's the sort of result of all the conversations I've had with other Quakers about my Christianity. So it's explaining my Christianity from a Quaker perspective and how my understanding of Christianity fits and grows from an understanding of Quakerism. So it's proved really popular in both in the UK and in North America. And so if you want to kind of if you want to know what Christianity can look like from a Quaker perspective, then do check it out. My next book, which is coming out this November, is called The Spirit of Freedom: Quaker-shaped Christian Theology. Quaker-shaped Christianity is like my brand. And I'm really proud of this book. I think it's even better than my first one. And it's in 2013, I started a blog called Jolly Quaker. And this book is like the cream of the 10 years of blogging that I've done on there. Various essays collected together, updated, and arranged thematically. And so they're all very Yeah.
Our internet broke for a moment there. Sorry, Mark, we rudely interrupted you. You was telling us about your new work and your essays.
Yeah, so the new book, The Spirit of Freedom, it's the cream of my first 10 years of my blog, Jolly Quaker. Various posts from those 10 years, edited, updated, and arranged according to theme. And I'm really proud of it. It's got some really good stuff. There's a chapter on bear theology. Bear is in the gay kind of bear, which I'm really excited about. So it's it's short, pithy. It's coming out in November. Published again by Christian Alternative Books.
And available on Amazon and such.
Yeah, available to pre-order. Yeah.
Fabulous. Well, we wish you well with that. I've really enjoyed chatting to you, Mark. I've learned lots, and I hope other people have. And we can follow you. Just mention your website again.
Yeah, jollyquaker.com.
Yeah, and you're on X as well.
I am on X. Mark D. Russ. Yeah, at Mark D. Russ.
Great, fabulous. Well, I hope everybody's enjoyed listening to this conversation with Mark. Do check out the Godcast. There's hundreds of interviews out there with theologians, musicians, authors, sports people, you name it. There's something for everybody. But for now, Mark Russ, thank you for coming on the Godcast. Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. It's been a pleasure.